Have you ever been driving through Michigan's Upper Peninsula, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but trees, swamps, and darkness, and suddenly wondered if you were really alone? Because according to decades of reports, sightings, strange sounds, and unexplained encounters, there may be something out there that we still can't explain. Bigfoot. And lately, the stories seem to be getting closer to home. Now, before we go any further, let me make something very clear. I'm not here to tell you that Bigfoot is real. I'm also not here to tell you that every strange noise in the woods is a 10-foot tall creature walking between the trees. But I am here to ask a question. Why do so many people who spend time in the woods continue to report seeing something they can't explain? And why does the Upper Peninsula seem to be such a hotspot for these stories? Today, we're heading deep into the Michigan Northwoods to take a look at Bigfoot in the Upper Peninsula. Not just the legend, the sightings, the history, the landscape, and some of the things that make you wonder if there's more to these stories than people realize. Let's start with the obvious question. What exactly is Bigfoot? The creature commonly called Bigfoot or Sasquatch is generally described as a large, human-like animal covered in dark hair. Most reports describe something standing somewhere between 6 and 10 feet tall. Witnesses often describe broad shoulders, long arms, a heavy build, and footprints much larger than a human's. Some people report hearing screams, howls, whistles, knocks, or strange vocalizations. Others describe trees being broken or twisted, unusual tracks, or something moving through the woods that seemed much too large and much too fast to be a normal animal. And then there are the sightings. Some last only a few seconds. Others supposedly involve an animal standing in the open long enough for a person to get a good look. And that's where things get interesting. Because the Upper Peninsula is almost the perfect environment for something like this to remain hidden. Think about the UP. Millions of acres of forest, thousands of lakes, countless rivers and streams, swamps, marshes, remote logging roads, abandoned roads and trails, and huge stretches of land where you can travel for miles without seeing another person. There are places in the Upper Peninsula where you can park your vehicle, walk into the woods, and within minutes feel completely separated from civilization. And if there were an unknown large animal living somewhere in Michigan, this is exactly the kind of place where you would expect it to be. Now let's talk about the reports that have been getting attention recently. This is a large part of the area I guide and have frequented for decades. And if you've driven that stretch of highway, you already know what kind of country we're talking about. Forests, wetlands, long stretches of road, very little development, and an enormous amount of habitat surrounding the highway. M28 cuts through some incredibly remote country. At night, you can go a long time without seeing another vehicle. Now imagine you're driving that road late at night. You see something moving near the edge of the highway. At first you assume it's a deer, maybe a bear, maybe a person, but then it stands up and it keeps standing. And suddenly you're looking at something that appears to be much taller than any person should be. You slow down. Maybe you get a glimpse of its face. Maybe you see it cross the road. And before you can even process what you're looking at, it's gone. That's the kind of encounter that creates a Bigfoot story. But there's another important part of this. The Upper Peninsula has a very long history of strange creature reports. These stories aren't something that suddenly appeared because of the internet. Long before Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Reddit, people were telling stories about unusual creatures in the woods. Hunters, fishermen, trappers, loggers, hikers, people traveling remote roads, and people who simply happened to be in the right or perhaps wrong place at the right time. Some of these reports are probably misidentifications. Some could be exaggerated over time. Some may have been completely fabricated, but others are difficult to explain. And that's where the mystery begins. One of the most common arguments against Bigfoot is simple. If an animal that large existed in Michigan, wouldn't we have found a body? Wouldn't we have bones? Wouldn't we have DNA? Wouldn't somebody have brought back undeniable proof by now? That's a very reasonable question. And honestly, it's probably the biggest problem with the Bigfoot theory. Because proving the existence of an unknown large mammal is a completely different thing from reporting one. A blurry photograph doesn't prove anything. A footprint can be faked, a sound can be misidentified, and a person seeing something for 5 seconds in the middle of the woods can genuinely believe what they saw while still being mistaken about what they actually saw. Humans are incredibly good at recognizing patterns. Sometimes we're so good at it that we see things that aren't really there. But here's the other side of the argument. The Upper Peninsula is enormous, and much of it is difficult terrain. We know there are animals living in Michigan that people rarely see. Black bears can disappear into thick cover incredibly quickly. Wolves can travel huge distances without being seen. Cougars have been reported throughout the state for years, despite how rarely they're observed. Moose can stand surprisingly close to a person in dense vegetation and remain almost completely hidden. The fact that we don't see something doesn't necessarily mean it isn't there. But there is another problem: population. If Bigfoot is a real animal, there would have to be enough of them to reproduce and maintain a population. And if there are enough of them to maintain a population, you'd expect more physical evidence. That brings us right back to the same question. Where is the evidence? And that is why Bigfoot remains a mystery instead of becoming accepted science. Now, one thing I find particularly interesting about the Upper Peninsula reports is the environment surrounding them. Many of the stories aren't coming from downtown areas. They're coming from the woods, remote roads, hunting areas, fishing areas, campgrounds, trails, and places where people are already accustomed to seeing wildlife. That doesn't prove anything, but it does raise an interesting question. If you spend enough time in the woods, eventually you realize something. You almost never see everything that's watching you. Think about that the next time you're walking a remote trail. You hear a branch snap behind you, you turn around, nothing. You hear something moving through the brush, nothing. You see a shadow between the trees, and when you look again, it's gone. Most of the time, there's a perfectly normal explanation. A deer, a bear, a raccoon, a squirrel, another person, wind moving through the trees. But every once in a while, you encounter something that doesn't immediately make sense. And that's when your brain starts filling in the blanks. Now, here's something else we need to talk about. The sounds. People who claim to have encountered Bigfoot frequently describe unusual vocalizations. Screams, howls, whistles, deep calls, knocking sounds, and strange noises coming from the forest. But the Upper Peninsula already has some incredible natural sounds. Coyotes can sound absolutely terrifying. Foxes can make noises that sound almost human. Loons can create sounds that seem like they're coming from another world. Owls can scream. Bears can make strange noises. And trees themselves can produce some unbelievable sounds when the wind moves through them. So if you're standing alone in the woods at 2 o'clock in the morning and hear something scream from somewhere beyond the trees, you don't necessarily have to assume Bigfoot, but you also probably aren't going to forget it. And that's one reason these stories survive. They're personal, they're emotional, and for the person who experienced it, whatever happened can feel completely real. Now let's talk about the idea that Bigfoot could actually survive in Michigan. If we're talking purely about habitat, the Upper Peninsula certainly has the space. There is abundant food. Deer, berries, fish, small mammals, carrion, plants, and countless water sources. There are huge areas where a large omnivorous animal could potentially move without encountering people every single day. But winter is another story. Michigan winters are brutal, especially in the Upper Peninsula. Heavy snow, ice, extreme cold, limited food, and months of difficult conditions. Any large animal living here would need an incredible ability to survive winter. And that's one of the reasons the Bigfoot theory becomes even more difficult to accept. But it's also one of the reasons people point to the UP as an interesting location. Because if an animal were highly intelligent, highly adaptable, nocturnal, and extremely good at avoiding people, the Upper Peninsula would give it plenty of places to hide. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that the woods can make you humble pretty quickly. You can know the area. You can understand the animals. You can know what tracks you're looking at. And you can still get surprised because the woods are constantly moving. Things are constantly happening that you don't see. And sometimes the biggest lesson you can learn outdoors is that you're not the smartest or most aware creature in the forest. So when I hear another story about something strange being seen in the UP, I don't immediately laugh it off. I also don't immediately believe it. I put it somewhere in the middle. Maybe it was a bear, maybe it was a person, maybe it was a deer standing on an unusual slope. Maybe the darkness completely changed the perception of what someone was seeing. Or maybe, just maybe, there's something out there that we haven't identified yet. And that's what makes Bigfoot so fascinating. It's not necessarily the idea of a giant hairy creature hiding behind a tree. It's the possibility that there are still things in the natural world we don't fully understand. Because we like to think we've discovered everything. We've mapped the forests. We've photographed the wildlife. We've got trail cameras, satellite imagery, drones, DNA testing, cell phones with cameras in our pockets. It feels like there shouldn't be any mysteries left. But then you go into the Upper Peninsula, and suddenly you realize how enormous this place really is. You can stand in the middle of the woods and look in every direction and see nothing but trees. No buildings, no roads, no people, just wilderness. And when you're standing there, it's pretty easy to understand why stories like this refuse to disappear. So what do I think? I don't know. And honestly, that's probably the most honest answer anyone can give. Personally, in all my years exploring the forests, lakes, and rivers, I haven't seen Bigfoot. I don't have a footprint. I don't have DNA. I don't have a crystal clear photograph. And until somebody produces evidence that can be independently verified, Bigfoot remains exactly what it has always been, a mystery. But if you're spending time in the Upper Peninsula, keep your eyes open. Because whether you believe in Bigfoot or not, there are real animals out there that can surprise you. And if you ever hear something walking through the woods that sounds like it's much bigger than you, don't assume you know what it is. Stop, listen, look around, and maybe grab your camera. Because if you actually capture something nobody can explain, I want to see it. This is YOOP Gone Wild, and around here, we don't have to go looking for the wild. Sometimes, the wild finds us. And if Bigfoot really is out there somewhere in the Upper Peninsula, well, he's got a hell of a lot of woods to hide in.